My name is Caroline Hayes, and for most of my 55 years, I believed that family meant sacrifice, that keeping quiet about my own success would somehow keep us close. That illusion shattered at my sister Rebecca's Labor Day BBQ. In front of neighbors, friends, and people I barely knew, she lifted her wine glass and called me useless. Her husband laughed, tossing in that I had no spark, no legacy. They had no idea I had quietly built a $4.8 million fortune, or that I had been ready to use it to pull her out of the debt strangling her. In that moment, I knew I would not save them. I would show them exactly who they had underestimated. She had gone all out this year, inviting half the neighborhood along with a handful of friends and family, the kind of mixed crowd that forces you to paste on a polite smile even when you would rather be anywhere else. I spotted my childhood friend Donna Reed talking with a cluster of women near the grill, her laughter carrying easily over the hum of conversation. Off to the side, a man I didn't recognize at first nursed a beer while listening to Ethan hold court. Donna caught my eye and gave me a little wave. The man turned slightly, and I realized it was Tyler Brooks, a name I had heard in passing from music headlines. I filled a plate with some brisket and potato salad and found a spot halfway down the table. The afternoon sun caught the condensation on my glass of lemonade, making it sparkle. Across from me, Rebecca moved easily among the guests, greeting each one with that hostess smile she had perfected. Ethan lingered by the grill in his designer sunglasses, flipping burgers like it was a performance. It had been a long time since I had been around this many people connected to Rebecca's life. I kept thinking about Dad sitting in his room at the retirement home in Raleigh, probably watching an old Western on television. Mom had been gone 7 years now, and even though she had been the glue between us, her absence only seemed to widen the cracks. I tried not to dwell on that as I forked a bite of brisket. Rebecca approached the head of the table with a glass of red wine in her hand. She stood there a moment, letting the chatter around her quiet. Her eyes found mine and lingered just long enough to let me know this was deliberate. She tilted her head, the corner of her mouth curling into something that looked like a smile but felt like the opening move in a game I hadn't agreed to play. "Caroline," she said loudly enough for the nearest tables to hear, "you are just useless. Tell me, what have you even done with your life?" The words hit harder than I expected, not because I believed them, but because she had chosen this place and these people to say them to. There was a slight gasp from someone at the far end of the table, and the scrape of a fork against a plate sounded unnaturally loud in the pause that followed. Before I could form any kind of response, Ethan chimed in from behind her, his voice carrying easily over the stillness. "She has nothing going on. No spark, no legacy." He grinned at Tyler as if this was all some harmless joke, but Tyler's eyes shifted away, uncomfortable. I caught Donna's expression as she looked from Rebecca to me, her brows knitting together. I felt every pair of eyes on me waiting. The old me might have stammered, might have tried to defend myself or make a joke to ease the tension. Instead, I felt my fingers wrap tighter around my glass, the cool condensation slick against my skin. I forced a small smile, one that felt tight and sharp, and gave a little nod, as if to say I had heard them but wasn't going to give them what they wanted. "Excuse me," I murmured, setting my glass down carefully. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping against the wooden deck floor. The sound was louder than I intended, and a few people flinched. I smoothed my shirt and stepped away from the table, the heat from the grill still hanging in the air as I passed Ethan. Inside, the shift was immediate. The hum of voices from outside faded, replaced by the quieter sounds of the house. I could still smell the smoke from the barbecue drifting through the open windows, but here it felt distant, like another world. I walked down the hallway toward the front of the house, the carpet soft under my sandals, and let myself breathe for the first time since I sat down. It wasn't anger that filled me in that moment, at least not the kind that explodes right away. It was something slower, heavier, the kind that sinks deep and waits. Outside, I could hear laughter starting up again, the party moving on as if nothing had happened. I stood there a moment listening and let the words useless and no legacy settle in my chest, not as truth but as a reminder. Then I turned toward the living room, away from the noise and away from the eyes that had been waiting for me to react. I sank into the end of the couch, my hands resting on my knees, listening to the muffled laughter that floated in through the open windows. Every burst of it felt like a spark hitting dry grass, the kind that could catch if I let it. I stared at the framed photo on the wall of Rebecca and Ethan on their wedding day, smiling like the world belonged to them. I remembered that day far too well, and the silent decision I made to swipe my credit card so she could have the venue she wanted when her own funds came up short. It wasn't the first time I had stepped in. Years earlier, when she was still in college at the University of North Carolina, tuition had gone up unexpectedly. Our parents had already stretched themselves thin, and I was the one who wrote the check to keep her from dropping out mid-semester. She thanked me then, though. Even at that moment, there had been something in her voice and note that suggested she thought it was my obligation rather than a gift. Then there was the boutique she had opened in Uptown Charlotte. She poured every dime she had into it and still came up short. I wired her $10,000 to cover inventory after she called me in tears about missing a shipment before her big launch. She had promised to pay it back when business took off. That promise had drifted away like smoke when the boutique shuttered within a year. The sounds outside grew louder for a moment, a chorus of clinking glasses and music turning up. I rubbed the back of my neck, thinking about how those memories weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern, one I had let myself accept for far too long. What really stung wasn't the money. It was the way she treated it like nothing, as if my help was just a stepping stone she could walk over without looking back. The same attitude had shown itself after Mom died in 2016. There had been a small piece of property in the family, a cabin near Lake Lure, that our parents had bought decades ago. When it came time to decide what to do with it, I could have pushed for my half. Instead, I told her to keep it, thinking maybe it would bridge the gap between us. She accepted without hesitation, without even a flicker of guilt, and within a year she had sold it to fund another one of her business ideas. My eyes drifted to the window. Rebecca's laugh cut through the air like glass breaking. I could almost picture her outside, playing the role of the perfect hostess while the words she had thrown at me still hung between us like smoke that wouldn't clear. The truth was, no one here knew the full story of my life. They didn't know about the years I spent building something quietly away from the parties and the flashy dinners. They didn't know about the long nights I stayed up watching the stock market, or the weekends I drove to look at fixer-upper houses that I later sold for double. They didn't know that my careful investments had grown into something real, something solid. $4.8 million sat across my accounts, the product of discipline and patience. That was my secret, and I had kept it that way for a reason. I never wanted money to be the thing people saw first. I thought keeping it private would protect my relationships, that it would keep people from treating me like a walking bank. I had even considered telling Rebecca about it recently, not to brag, but because I knew she was in trouble again. I had been ready to clear her debts to give her the breathing room to start fresh. But now, sitting here with her words still echoing in my head, I realized how foolish that had been. This wasn't about debts or fresh starts. This was about the way she saw me, the way she had always seen me. As a tool to be used when convenient and ignored when not. A burst of applause outside made me flinch. I leaned back against the couch, staring up at the ceiling, letting the noise fade into the background. I could feel something shifting inside me, a slow tightening like a knot being pulled. It wasn't rage, not yet, but it was the kind of clarity that comes when the scales finally fall from your eyes. I glanced at my phone on the coffee table. The lock screen lit up with a new message, but I didn't reach for it. I knew it would just be another reminder of this world outside the window that I didn't belong to anymore. Instead, I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the party, thinking about every choice I had made that had brought me here, and wondering if maybe for the first time I was finally ready to make a choice for myself. I pushed myself up from the couch and headed toward the guest room where I had dropped my bag earlier. The murmur of voices and music outside followed me down the hallway, but it was softer here, like it had to fight its way through the walls. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets Rebecca always kept in her drawers. Sunlight cut across the bedspread, and my tote bag sat near the foot of the bed where I had left it. I reached in to grab my wallet, thinking I might as well keep it with me until I was ready to leave. My fingers brushed against a thick envelope tucked inside. I pulled it out, frowning. It was from a bank I hadn't used in years addressed to me at my old townhouse in Durham. The forwarding label showed it had been redirected to my current address in Asheville. I sat down on the edge of the bed and slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a statement for a personal loan, $420,000 taken out in my name. My eyes skimmed down to the loan date, the 15th of March 2022, and the address listed beneath it. It was my old address, the one I had left behind nearly 2 years ago. The payments were months past due. Interest had piled up like snow on a roof, and there were warnings in bold type about impending legal action. A knot formed in my stomach. The purpose of the loan was noted in the smallest print, almost like it was meant to be overlooked. Business capital for Rebecca Collins Couture. My chest tightened as I read it again. That was her boutique, the one she had opened in Charlotte with so much fanfare and closed quietly less than a year later. I turned to the signature line on the final page. There was my name written in a looping hand that was close enough to mine to fool someone who didn't know better. But I knew my own signature, and this was not it. The curl of the C, the way the L leaned too far forward, the slight upward slant at the end, all wrong. My fingers tightened around the page until it crumpled slightly. Beneath the signature was my social security number, clear as day. I stared at it, cold washing over me. She hadn't just borrowed my name. She had taken the very thing that anchored my identity and used it to prop up her failing dream. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind was a carousel of images. Rebecca calling me 2 years ago, sounding upbeat, telling me she had found a new investor. The sudden trip she took to Charlotte, claiming she was finalizing a lease. The way she brushed off my questions about financing, laughing that I worried too much. It all clicked into place like puzzle pieces I hadn't even realized I was holding. I set the statement down on the bed and pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. A part of me wanted to believe there was some mistake, that someone else had done this, that she had no idea. But that part was small and it was shrinking fast. I picked the statement back up and flipped to the payment history. There hadn't been a single payment made in the last 6 months. Calls and notices from the bank had gone unanswered. I imagined her tossing them into a drawer, telling herself she'd figure it out later, just like she always did. The noise from outside swelled for a moment, and I could hear Ethan's voice booming, telling a story, probably about himself. I thought about the two of them together, playing the part of the perfect couple, while their lives were built on borrowed time and borrowed money, some of it mine. The shock I had felt when I first opened the envelope was already hardening into something else. My pulse steadied, my thoughts sharpened. If she had gone this far, if she had crossed this line, then there was no telling what else she had done in my name. I folded the statement carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. My mind was already moving ahead, sorting through options, thinking about who I could trust to help me uncover everything. One name came to mind immediately, and I knew she would pick up the phone if I called. But I wasn't ready to make that call just yet. I needed to sit with this for a moment to let the weight of it settle fully. I set the envelope on the nightstand beside a small vase of fresh flowers. Rebecca must have put there this morning. The cheerful blooms looked absurd next to the proof of what she had done. I stood and crossed to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the yard. Rebecca was at the center of it all, laughing with a group of guests, the sunlight catching her gold bracelet. Ethan was beside her, gesturing animatedly to Tyler Brooks, who nodded politely. I wondered if Tyler had any idea who he was really dealing with. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them enjoy their perfect little scene. They had no idea that the moment I opened that envelope, something shifted. The quiet, accommodating sister they thought they knew was gone, and I had no intention of coming back. I slipped my phone out of my bag and scrolled until I found Lauren's number. It had been a while since we last talked, but she was the only person I trusted with something like this. My thumb hovered for a moment before I tapped call. She picked up on the second ring, her voice steady and familiar as if no time had passed. "Caroline," she said, "what's going on?" I took a breath, keeping my voice low even though the house was empty behind me. "I found something. A loan in my name. $420,000. For Rebecca's boutique. It's a forgery." There was a pause. The kind where you know the person on the other end is already piecing together the shape of the problem. That's serious, she said. We can't talk about this over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Where? Donna's place, she said without hesitation. 8:30. Bring the paperwork. I agreed and we hung up. The moment the call ended, I felt a small shift inside me. Not relief exactly, but the comfort of having a direction. I slid the envelope back into my bag, my mind already turning over the possibilities of what Lauren might find. She had spent 15 years in corporate fraud investigation down in Atlanta before moving into private work. I had seen her pull a client out of a legal nightmare once after their ex-business partner used their identity to rack up debt. She was sharp, thorough, and unafraid of confrontation. I glanced out the window again. The party had loosened into smaller groups, the kind where gossip circulates more easily. Rebecca leaned in toward a pair of women, smiling as if nothing in her world could touch her. I wondered how she would look if she knew what sat folded in my bag. I decided I had been here long enough. There was no point pretending to enjoy myself. I slipped down the hall past the hum of voices and out through the side door that led to the driveway. The air was warm and smelled faintly of grilled corn. My car sat at the curb under the shade of a maple tree, the hood still cool from the drive over. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of the yard in my rearview mirror. Ethan was holding court with a small crowd, Tyler among them, his hands moving as if he was selling them on a dream. Rebecca stood just to the side, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm, her laughter floating after me as I turned the corner. The drive back to Asheville was just over 2 hours, plenty of time for memories to unspool whether I wanted them to or not. I thought about the night Lauren had saved her friend from losing everything. The friend's former partner had forged a signature on a lease for high-end equipment, leaving her on the hook for nearly $100,000. Lauren had traced every document, lined up the discrepancies, and walked into a meeting with the bank so prepared that within 20 minutes they had agreed to clear her client's name. It was that same relentlessness I needed now. Rebecca wouldn't admit to anything unless she was backed into a corner, and even then she would twist the story until it suited her. I couldn't confront her empty-handed. The road wound through stretches of pine forest, the late summer sun slanting low through the trees. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, but my thoughts kept looping back to the statement in my bag. Every page was a piece of the trap Rebecca had built, and I had walked around it blind until now. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had shifted to a soft orange. My house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after a long day. I carried my bag inside, setting it on the kitchen counter. I made tea without really tasting it, my mind already on tomorrow. I would hand Lauren the envelope, tell her everything I knew, and let her start digging. I didn't need to know every step she would take. I just needed the truth documented in a way that couldn't be denied. In the stillness of my kitchen, I could almost hear my mother's voice reminding me that protecting yourself was not the same as hurting someone else. Maybe she was right. But tonight the line between the two felt thin, and I knew exactly which side I intended to stand on. I slipped my phone out of my bag and found Lauren's number. It had been months since we last spoke, but she was the only one I could trust with something like this. My thumb hovered before I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring, her voice calm, the same as always. "Caroline," she said, "what's going on?" I kept my voice low, even though the house was mostly quiet. "I found a loan. $420,000. In my name. For Rebecca's boutique. It's forged." A pause, then her tone sharpened. "That's serious. We can't talk about this over the phone. Meet me tomorrow morning." "Where?" "Donna's Cafe," she answered. 8:30. "Bring everything." I agreed, and the line went dead. The moment I slid the phone back into my bag, I felt a shift. Not relief, but direction. I tucked the envelope in carefully, knowing Lauren's eye for detail could pull this apart. She had spent 15 years in corporate fraud investigation in Atlanta before moving into private work. I'd seen her dismantle a forged lease for a client in under a week, getting them out of a $100,000 mess. Outside, the party had broken into small clusters. Rebecca stood with two women, head tilted, smiling. I wondered if she'd smile like that if she knew what I'd found. I had no reason to stay. I moved quietly through the hall, out the side door into the driveway. The air was warm, carrying the faint smell of grilled corn. My car was parked under a maple hood, cool to the touch. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse in the mirror, Ethan, hands in motion, talking to a small circle with Tyler among them. Rebecca at his side, laughter trailing behind me as I turned the corner. The 2-hour drive to Asheville gave me too much time to think. My mind replayed the time Lauren saved her friend from identity theft. Her friend's ex-partner had signed her name on a lease for high-end equipment, leaving her holding the debt. Lauren had gathered every discrepancy, every forged detail, and walked into the bank so prepared they cleared the account in under half an hour. That was the precision I needed now. Rebecca wouldn't confess. She would rewrite the story until it served her. I couldn't confront her without proof. The late summer sun dipped lower as I wound through pine-lined roads. My grip on the wheel stayed steady, but every turn seemed to bring me back to the envelope in my bag. Each page was another nail in a trap I hadn't seen being built. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky was streaked with orange. My house was still and cool. I set my bag on the kitchen counter, made tea. I didn't taste and thought about tomorrow. I'd hand Lauren the envelope, lay out every piece I knew, and let her dig. I didn't need to know all her steps. I just needed the truth on paper, undeniable. In the quiet, I could almost hear my mother telling me that defending yourself isn't the same as hurting someone else. Maybe. But tonight the line felt paper thin, and I knew exactly which side I planned to stand on. Donna's Cafe was already busy when I pulled into the small gravel lot the next morning. The air was crisp for early September, and the smell of fresh coffee hit me as soon as I stepped inside. I spotted Lauren in a corner booth, a laptop open in front of her, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up the moment I walked in and gave a short nod, the kind that told me she was already deep into the work. I slid into the seat across from her and set the envelope on the table. She didn't waste time with small talk. She pulled out the papers, flipping through them with a practiced eye, her fingers tracing over the numbers and dates. "It's exactly what you said," she murmured. "Loan taken out March 15, 2022. Address is your old place in Durham. And this signature isn't yours." She turned the page toward me, tapping the line where my name was scrawled. The strokes were just wrong enough that to me it looked like a cheap imitation. "There's more," she continued. "They used your social security number. That makes it federal, not just a civil issue. And the bank has already marked this account as high-risk default. They're preparing to escalate." My stomach tightened, but not from fear. It was the confirmation I needed. I wasn't imagining it, and there was no way Rebecca could explain this away. Lauren reached into her bag and slid a folder across to me. Inside were copies of the loan agreement, the signature page, and the application form with my information typed neatly into the boxes. She had even printed a side-by-side of my real signature and the forgery. "If you want to pursue this," she said, "you'll need to keep these somewhere safe. And you should start making a record of everything she's ever owed you. It will strengthen your position." I leaned back, letting out a slow breath. For years I had kept mental notes of every time I had stepped in for Rebecca, but I had never written them down. I opened my notebook and began listing them one by one. "College tuition," I said, quietly writing it on the first line. "Junior year, her scholarship didn't cover the increase. I paid the difference so she could stay enrolled." I added another. "The boutique in Charlotte before this one. She ran out of inventory before a holiday sale. I sent $10,000 to cover it." Lauren nodded, her eyes scanning my list as it grew. "And the wedding," I said, pausing for a moment. "She and Ethan wanted that hotel ballroom in Charleston, but they were short on the deposit. I paid it thinking they'd reimburse me after the honeymoon. That was 7 years ago." As the list took shape, I realized how much I had been carrying. Every line was a choice I had made, each one justified at the time as helping family. Seeing it written down made it harder to pretend it had been anything but a pattern of taking. Lauren closed her laptop and folded her hands on the table. "You've got enough history here to show intent if it comes to that. But we need to focus on the forgery. That's the most serious piece, and it's the one she can't spin without contradicting herself." The waitress came by with refills, and I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. The hum of the cafe felt distant, my mind fixed on the pages in front of me. I don't just want to clear my name, I said, finally. I want her to answer for it. Lauren's gaze held mine. Then we're on the same page. We sat there for another 20 minutes going over the details. She explained the next steps, the documents I should prepare, the statements I should avoid making directly to Rebecca. Everything would be about building a clean trail, one that would stand on its own no matter how she tried to twist it. When I left the cafe, the folder was tucked securely under my arm. The sun had risen higher, casting long shadows across the lot. I walked to my car with a steady pace, my thoughts sharper than they had been in a long time. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to Rebecca's chaos. I was preparing to face it head-on with proof in my hand, and someone at my side who knew exactly how to dismantle it. Lauren was sliding her keys into her bag when she glanced back at me and asked if I had ever considered looking into Ethan. I frowned, not sure where she was going with it, but before I could answer, her phone buzzed on the table. She checked the screen and lifted her eyebrows. "It's Tyler Brooks," she said. "He was at the BBQ yesterday." She answered on speaker. Tyler's voice came through low, the kind of tone people use when they are about to say something they shouldn't. "Lauren, I know this is sudden, but I wanted to check on something you might know about. Ethan Collins. Yesterday he was talking up some big music deal, said he landed a $2.5 million contract with a label out in Los Angeles. He even showed me an email. Something about it felt off." Lauren's eyes flicked to mine. I stayed quiet while she asked him a few pointed questions. Tyler explained that the email looked official, but the formatting was strange, and the sender's address wasn't the standard domain the label used. He'd seen a few scams in his time and thought it was worth flagging before he got pulled in. Once the call ended, Lauren set her phone down and pulled her laptop back out. She typed fast, her fingers moving like muscle memory through databases and contacts. I watched the reflection of the screen in her glasses as she sent a quick message to someone in Los Angeles she trusted. We didn't have to wait long. 15 minutes later, an email landed in her inbox from an executive at the Real label. They confirmed no such contract existed. The email Ethan had flashed at the BBQ was a complete fabrication, likely sent from a throwaway account to himself, so he could forward it as proof to potential investors. Lauren leaned back, folding her arms. "That's not just puffing up a resume. That's fraud. And if Tyler was a target, he's not the only one." I felt a slow heat building in my chest. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. Ethan had always had a way of making himself look bigger than life, but I had assumed it was harmless ego. Now it was clear he was using those backyard parties to bait people with his charm and a fake golden ticket. Lauren started pulling other names from her files, cross-referencing events Ethan had hosted with individuals who later reported financial losses. There were 3 matches within the last year alone. None had tied it directly to him, but the patterns were too similar to be coincidence. So while Rebecca was busy bleeding me dry in the shadows, her husband was running a con in broad daylight. I thought about the smug look on his face at the BBQ, the way he had leaned into the crowd while spinning his story. I thought about Rebecca, her hand resting on his arm, laughing at his every word. They were a perfect match in all the worst ways. Lauren closed the laptop with a decisive snap. "If you're willing, we can use this. His reputation is part of her social armor. Take that away and she loses cover." It clicked instantly. I didn't just have a way to clear my name now. I had a chance to pull the curtain back on both of them at once. We stood to leave, and Lauren told me she would start compiling a packet on Ethan's activities. She would reach out to Tyler again and let him know the truth, but only after we had more in place. The more investors who confirmed they had been misled, the harder it would be for him to talk his way out of it. Walking back to my car, I noticed the sunlight catching on the folder in my hands. It felt heavier than it had an hour ago, loaded with more than just my sister's lies. It carried the shape of something larger now, something that could dismantle both their facades. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and let the idea settle. If this was going to happen, it would have to be done carefully. But the thought of it didn't scare me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of just trying to survive it. Lauren's office sat above a florist shop on a quiet side street. the smell of fresh-cut stems drifting up the narrow stairwell as I climbed. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows, giving the hallway a muted glow. Her door was half open, and the sound of quick, precise typing told me she was already in work mode. She glanced up when I stepped inside her reading glasses, slipping a little as she smiled. "There you are," she said, gesturing for me to shut the door. I did, the click sounding louder than I expected in the small room. Her desk was covered in neat stacks of paper, each with a bright sticky note on top, and her laptop was ringed by empty coffee cups. I dropped my bag into the chair beside me as she slid a thick folder across the desk. Inside was a checklist printed in black ink, each bullet point numbered. At the top was a header in bold: primary actions, Carolyn Collins. "We're doing this in 2 main stages," she began, leaning forward, elbows on the desk. "First, the bank. We send the forged signature and the SSN evidence through their secure fraud reporting portal. No casual emails, no phone calls. Everything has to be traceable, timestamped, and linked to original scanned documents. That way there's a permanent record that you took immediate action once you discovered the fraud." I nodded slowly, my eyes moving over the first set of steps. She had written them in plain, almost clipped language, but I could see the structure underneath. It was clean, logical, airtight. "What happens after we send it?" I asked. "They'll open a case file," she said. "You'll get a fraud case number within 48 hours. Then their compliance team will verify that the address and the signature aren't yours. When they confirm, we'll formally request a clearance letter. That letter will remove the account from your credit history and your liability. And more importantly, it will serve as a concrete statement that Rebecca committed identity theft." Her voice didn't waver when she said my sister's name, and I found that I appreciated the absence of pity. This wasn't about feelings, it was about facts. She tapped the next page of the folder. "Step 2 is Ethan. I've put together a package for Paula Jenkins at Sound Truth. She's a music blogger, but not the fluff kind. She's known for pulling receipts on scams in the industry. I've included a copy of the fake contract, Tyler's account of what happened at the BBQ, and confirmation from the label that it's fabricated." I could see the headline forming in my mind: Ethan's name dragged into a public mess he couldn't spin. It was a small flicker of satisfaction, but I let it burn. Lauren outlined the timing: we'd send the Paula package in the evening, hitting her inbox right when she was known to review leads. Paula was meticulous about checking sources, and she had contacts in Los Angeles who could dig deeper without raising suspicion. "He'll try to threaten you if it goes public," Lauren said, pushing her glasses back up. "He'll talk about defamation, maybe even hiring a lawyer, but he has nothing if every claim you make is backed by verifiable evidence. I've marked every document with its source and chain of custody. That's your shield." She turned to her laptop and pulled up a color-coded spreadsheet, each row a piece of evidence, its origin and its verification method. I watched as she scrolled through bank documents, email headers, metadata from Ethan's fake contract, even screenshots of his public posts bragging about upcoming deals. "Do you want to go after them both at once?" she asked, finally looking at me over the top of the screen. I didn't hesitate. Yes. The plan became more detailed as the hour went on. Lauren suggested starting with the bank submission that afternoon before the weekend, so it would be in the system by Monday. That meant we could spend the next 2 days building the Ethan case without distraction. She wanted every name, every person who had been at one of his events and might have heard the same contract story. I gave her what I could remember from the barbecue, watching as she typed each one into her notes. Tyler was already ready to talk, but if we could get even one more person on the record, Paula's article would have more than just a single source. We paused only when her phone buzzed with a call from a contact at the bank's fraud department. She put it on speaker and used the conversation to confirm their preferred method for receiving sensitive files. When she hung up, she smiled faintly. "That's our in." By the time we closed the last folder, the daylight outside had shifted to the deeper gold of early evening. Lauren handed me a USB drive, its black casing plain but solid. "Encrypted copies of everything. Don't keep this at home. Don't keep it in your car. Put it somewhere she can't reach, even if that means a safe deposit box." I slipped it into my bag and zipped it shut. I could feel the subtle hum in my chest that comes when you finally step out of the shadow someone's kept you in for years. "You ready?" she asked. "More than ready." We stood in the doorway for a moment, the cool air from the hallway drifting in. The scent of the florist's roses floated up faintly, and, for some reason, it made me think of my mother, of the quiet way she used to arrange flowers in the kitchen without ever needing to say what she was thinking. Out on the street, the traffic was light. I walked to my car with the folder under my arm, its weight steady, reassuring. It didn't feel like evidence anymore. It felt like control, and for the first time in a long time, it was mine. The post went live before sunrise. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a notification from Lauren. Just 2 words. "It's up." I sat at the table with my mug and opened the link she'd sent. Paula Jenkins had wasted no time. The headline was sharp enough to cut glass: Ethan Collins accused of fabricating multi-million-dollar music contract, and the subheading made it worse for him. Complete list of alleged victims and financial backers inside. The article was thorough. She had embedded screenshots of the fake contract, the metadata showing it was created on Ethan's own laptop, and quotes from Tyler Brooks, who had apparently decided he was done keeping quiet. Tyler's statement was blunt. He said he had personally been approached by Ethan with the same deal and had seen enough inconsistencies to walk away. He warned others in the investment community to do the same. By mid-morning, the post had been shared hundreds of times. People from the music industry were commenting, tagging others, asking if they'd been approached too. Lauren texted me again an hour later, linking to a tweet where a small record label executive confirmed that Ethan had tried to pitch the contract to them as well. I spent most of the day letting it all play out without interfering. It was strange watching the fallout begin from a distance, knowing I had set it in motion. There was no guilt in me. Just the awareness that the truth was finally being pulled into the light. That night I heard from Tyler directly. He called to tell me the response had been bigger than he expected. Investors who had been on the fence were now contacting him, saying they would file their own complaints. He sounded almost relieved, like a weight had been lifted. I thanked him for stepping forward, though we both knew it was the only thing that made sense. A few days later, the second part of the plan came through. I got an envelope in the mail from the bank, the logo stamped in dark blue across the top. Inside was a letter on official letterhead confirming that the loan had been taken out fraudulently. My name would be cleared from the account, and the investigation would proceed with the listed borrower. Rebecca's name. They also included a formal request for her to contact their fraud department within 7 business days. I imagined her face when she opened that letter, the way she would scramble to find some explanation. I didn't have to imagine long. My phone started ringing the next morning. First once, then again, and then again within minutes. Rebecca's name lit up the screen each time, and I let it go to voicemail. She left messages, her voice switching between frantic and angry. In one, she sounded close to tears, saying she didn't know what was going on and that we needed to talk. In another, she was sharp, accusing me of ruining her reputation. I didn't respond to any of them. Lauren told me to stay silent. Every call, every voicemail, she said, was another piece of evidence. She was right. I forwarded them to her without listening to the rest. The days between the blog post and the bank letter had felt like the slow buildup before a storm. Now the storm was here. Paula's article was still making the rounds, with updates being added as more people came forward. The bank's deadline for Rebecca was ticking down. And through it all, I stayed quiet. 1 week after the article dropped, Paula posted a follow-up. This time the headline was shorter but more pointed. More investors step forward in Ethan Collins fraud case. She listed the new names, including one from Miami who claimed to have lost nearly $200,000. The comments under the post were a mix of outrage and disbelief, strangers arguing about whether someone like Ethan could have fooled so many people. I didn't join in. I just read the same way I had been reading everything since this started, taking in each piece of the puzzle as it fell into place. By the end of that week, Rebecca had called me 12 times and sent 5 text messages. I didn't read those either. Whatever she had to say, it could wait. The silence between us felt deliberate now, not like avoidance but like control. On the 8th day, a courier dropped off another envelope from the bank. It was addressed to Rebecca, but had been delivered to my address by mistake. I didn't open it, just handed it directly to Lauren. She would know what to do. Standing in my living room after the courier left, I looked out the window at the quiet street. Somewhere in the city, Rebecca was panicking. Somewhere else, Ethan was probably trying to spin his way out of Paula's reporting. And here I was with nothing but time on my side. The knock was sharp enough to echo through the hallway. I hesitated for a second, my hand hovering over the doorknob, already knowing who it would be. When I opened it, Rebecca was on the porch, her eyes red and wet. Ethan standing just behind her with his arms crossed. "Can we come in?" she asked, her voice tight, almost breaking. I stepped back without answering and let them walk into the living room. Rebecca sat on the edge of the couch, like she couldn't settle, wiping at her face. Ethan stayed on his feet, glancing around the room, as if he was inspecting it for flaws. "Caroline, please," she started, her hands twisting in her lap. "I need your help. The bank is saying I have to pay this whole amount back immediately. They're threatening legal action. I can't. I just can't do it without you." Her words tumbled over each other, but I didn't move. My hands rested on the arm of the chair, my body calm even as her panic filled the room. Ethan spoke next, his tone flat. "This whole thing is a mess because of a middleman. That contract was supposed to be clean. Somebody doctored it before it reached the investors. I had nothing to do with that." I looked at him, the corners of my mouth not even twitching. "And the signatures? The loan application, was that the same mysterious middleman?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and let his voice rise. "You're not exactly spotless yourself, Caroline. People talk. If you think this won't blow back on you, you're wrong." Rebecca flinched at his tone, but she didn't stop him. She leaned forward instead, her voice soft, almost pleading. "You've always been there for me. Please, just once more. We can work it out, pay you back, fix everything." I took a breath, letting the air move slowly in and out, the quiet stretching until Rebecca's eyes darted up to meet mine. "Do you remember the boutique?" I asked. "You told me you needed a short-term loan to keep it open. I drained my savings for you." Her lips pressed together and I kept going. "Do you remember your wedding? The one with the champagne tower and the rented chandeliers? I paid the deposits when you came up short and you promised you'd make it right. You never did." Ethan shifted, his jaw tightening. "That's ancient history." "And now," I said, my voice steady, "I find out you took a loan in my name. $420,000. My signature forged, my social security number used. You didn't just take my money this time, you took my identity." Rebecca's shoulders sagged, her hands covering her face. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could pay it off before you even knew." I shook my head. "No, you thought I'd do what I've always done. Bail you out quietly. Keep the mess between us." Ethan stepped closer, his shadow cutting across the rug. "You're making a mistake if you think this ends well for you." I stood, closing the small space between us until I could smell the cologne he'd worn to my BBQ a week ago. "I'm not the one who fabricated a contract to swindle investors. I'm not the one on Paula Jenkins' blog, and I'm not the one the bank is calling." The silence after that was heavy, each second tightening the air in the room. Rebecca dropped her hands and looked up at me, her eyes rimmed with desperation. "I'm not helping you," I said finally. "Not this time. You'll deal with the bank. You'll deal with the fallout." Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. I walked to the front door and opened it. The sound of the quiet street outside felt almost too peaceful for the tension in the room. "You need to leave." Ethan's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move until Rebecca stood. She brushed past me, her perfume lingering for a moment before the breeze took it. Ethan followed, pausing on the porch just long enough to meet my gaze with a look that was equal parts anger and calculation. Then they were gone, their footsteps fading down the sidewalk, leaving only the hollow stillness of my living room behind. The silence in the house felt heavy, but it did not last long. Within days, word began to spread about Ethan, and it was not just in whispers anymore. Music blogs started posting detailed breakdowns of Paula's article, each one adding new names of people who claimed they had been promised deals that never materialized. The story caught fire in Nashville. Local television stations ran quick segments showing stock footage of downtown streets and concert venues, while voiceovers described a producer accused of orchestrating elaborate cons. Some national outlets even picked it up, framing it as yet another cautionary tale of ego and greed in the entertainment industry. The photographs they dug up were the same ones Ethan had curated so carefully, him at rooftop parties, shaking hands with people he barely knew, smiling under stage lights as if he belonged there. In print and on screens, those same smiles looked smug, almost desperate. The comments on the articles were ruthless, with people recalling run-ins with him and warning others to stay away. The fallout was quick. Ethan was dropped from the lineup of 2 summer music festivals he had been boasting about for months. The organizers released polite but firm statements saying they had reviewed the allegations and decided to move in a different direction. Within a week, 3 artists announced publicly that they had no further plans to work with him. In a town like Nashville, where the music industry runs on trust and reputation, that was the equivalent of a door slamming shut. Rebecca's unraveling was slower but far more personal. The bank letters kept arriving, each one more urgent than the last. The calls she had been ignoring turned into direct threats of legal action. First, the black SUV she loved was repossessed right from the driveway, broad daylight, in front of neighbors who had once admired her style. Then delivery men came for the racks of high-end clothes. Some were seized, others quietly sold online for a fraction of their worth. The sparkle that had once been her armor was vanishing piece by piece. I heard through Donna that the landlord of their rental house had finally had enough. Rebecca had been late on rent too many times, and when the bank froze their joint account, she had nothing left to offer. Within a month, she and Ethan were gone from that pristine neighborhood, replaced by a young family who didn't seem to care about the lingering gossip. One afternoon, I stopped by Donna's cafe for coffee. She leaned against the counter, lowering her voice, even though the place was empty. "You wouldn't believe what people are saying at the Thursday night wine club. Half of them used to worship Rebecca's taste. Now they're pretending they never knew her." I stirred cream into my coffee slowly. "What exactly are they saying?" Donna smiled faintly. "That they always knew she was trying too hard. That they feel sorry for her but not sorry enough to invite her anywhere. Someone swore they saw her at a consignment shop arguing over the price of a pair of heels she used to brag about paying full price for." It struck me then how different this was from the fights we had when we were younger. Back then, the battles were loud, impulsive, easily forgotten. This was quiet and calculated, the kind of ending that seeps in and changes the way people look at you forever. By mid-October, Rebecca was living in a cramped apartment on the edge of town. I happened to drive by one day and saw the peeling paint on the railings, the blinds half drawn like she was hiding from the world. I did not stop. I did not even slow down. Donna told me Rebecca had been asking around for work, but no one wanted to be connected to her now. Even boutiques were wary, and she had burned too many bridges in retail to be welcomed back. A former coworker of hers ran into her at the grocery store and said Rebecca looked older, tired, with the kind of exhaustion that makeup can't cover. I thought about her often in those weeks, not out of pity but out of a kind of detached curiosity. This was a woman who had once stood in her backyard with a glass of wine calling me useless in front of friends and strangers. Now she was counting coins at checkout. It was not the kind of revenge people imagine, with dramatic confrontations or triumphant speeches. It was slower, more deliberate. No slammed doors, no final showdown. Just a steady stripping away of everything she valued until she had to face herself without the glitter and the lies. One evening, I came home to find the first chill of fall in the air. I hung my coat by the door, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table. Outside, the street was quiet, the leaves just beginning to turn. Somewhere across town, Rebecca was probably staring at a stack of overdue notices, wondering which part of her life would be taken away next. For the first time in years, I did not feel the urge to step in and shield her. The weight of that realization was not heavy. It felt like breathing clean air after too long in a closed room. The morning sun cast a pale gold light over the unfinished brick walls, and the sound of hammers echoed across the open lot. I stood at the edge of the site, hard hat balanced loosely on my head, watching the skeleton of the Margaret Hayes Community Center take shape. The name was etched on a temporary sign near the entrance, and seeing my mother's name there still stirred something deep in my chest. This was more than a building. It was the proof that all those years of quiet work and careful choices had led somewhere. Children from a nearby elementary school were walking past on a field trip, pointing at the construction equipment with wide eyes. A few waved, and I found myself smiling and waving back. I imagined the classrooms that would fill this space, the workshops where teenagers could learn trades, the kitchens where families could gather for cooking classes. For the first time in a long time, I was building something that would last beyond me. I heard footsteps on gravel and turned to see Lauren approaching, her hair pulled back and sunglasses perched on her head. She looked out at the work in progress, letting out a low whistle. "You picked a good day to be here. The framing on the east wing is almost done." I nodded, feeling the wind catch the scent of fresh lumber. "It already feels real." She handed me a paper cup of coffee and leaned against the temporary fence. "I came to tell you something. A reporter from the Asheville Chronicle called me this morning. They're doing a feature on community-funded projects and they want to interview you." I took a slow sip of the coffee. "And I assume they'll want to talk about Rebecca too." Lauren shrugged. "Probably. But you don't have to answer anything you don't want to. Just be you." The interview was set for the following afternoon. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, and met the reporter, a man in his 30s with a notepad tucked under his arm, in one of the finished meeting rooms that still smelled faintly of paint. He asked about my vision for the center, about the programs we hoped to launch, and about why I had chosen to name it after my mother. When he finally leaned back in his chair, pen poised, he said carefully, "There's been a lot in the news about your sister recently. Some people might wonder if this project is in some way connected to that." I let the silence stretch for a moment, choosing my words. "I don't think about it that way. My focus is here on creating a place that gives people opportunities. The past doesn't need to define the future unless you let it." He nodded, jotting something down, and the question never came up again. By the time he left, the late afternoon light was streaming through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Lauren came by later that week, walking me through the latest updates on the fraud investigation. She didn't linger on Rebecca's name or Ethan's. Instead, we talked about the first set of classes that would be offered here once the center opened. Carpentry, welding, culinary arts. As we walked the perimeter, I noticed the way the mountains framed the horizon, their peaks dusted with the last hints of summer green. There was a stillness in the air that felt like a turning point. I thought about how far I had come from that backyard on Labor Day, the taste of grilled food in the air, the sting of public humiliation sharp against my skin. Now the sting was gone, replaced by something stronger, steadier. This was my answer, not in words or accusations, but in bricks and beams and open doors. We stopped near the west wing, where a group of workers were lifting steel into place. Lauren glanced at me, a small smile playing at her lips. "You look lighter, you know that." "Maybe I am," I said. "Or maybe I just finally let go of what wasn't mine to carry." The sound of a drill filled the air, and I found myself watching the sun catch the dust in golden flecks. I felt no urgency, no need to rush this moment. The work would go on, and so would I. 2 weeks later, I stood in my bedroom with an open suitcase on the bed, the soft morning light spilling through the window. Neatly folded clothes were stacked beside a worn leather travel journal, the one I had been saving for the right moment. A one-way ticket to San Francisco sat on the nightstand, its crisp edges a reminder that this time the change was permanent. Outside, the last traces of autumn were giving way to the sharp bite of winter. The air felt cleaner somehow, as if the season itself was ready to turn the page with me. I walked to the dresser, picked up my mother's silver bracelet, and slipped it onto my wrist. It had been years since I wore it, but today it felt right. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at the street I had called home for so long. It was quiet the way I liked it. No phone buzzing with demands, no obligations I didn't choose. For the first time in years, my life belonged entirely to me. The memory of that Labor Day barbecue flickered in my mind. Rebecca's voice sharp and mocking, calling me useless in front of everyone. For so long those words had burned in my chest, heavy and unshakable. Now they were just an echo, faint and distant like the muffled noise from a party you left hours ago. I thought of the Margaret Hayes Community Center, its walls rising higher each week, its foundation solid. I thought of the people who would walk through its doors not knowing or caring about the petty cruelty that had sparked its creation. They would only see a place built to help them grow. And that was enough. Lauren stopped by to see me off, carrying a bakery box from a little cafe downtown. She set it on the counter, poured herself some coffee, and leaned against the kitchen island. "So you really are going?" I smiled. "I really am. You deserve it. After everything you've earned the right to start fresh." I knew she was right. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a family that didn't know how to see me. Leaving now didn't feel like running away. It felt like finally stepping into my own life. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when nothing important is left unsaid. When she left, I stood at the door for a long moment, watching her car disappear down the street. Then I closed it gently and turned back to my suitcase. By the time evening came, the house was still and ready. I set my keys on the counter for the new tenant and walked through each room one last time. The living room where I had faced Rebecca and Ethan. The kitchen where I had brewed endless cups of coffee to steal my nerves. The quiet bedroom that had been both a refuge and a prison. When I stepped outside, the cool air wrapped around me. My cab pulled up to the curb and I loaded my bags into the trunk. As the driver pulled away, I looked back at the house, but only once. The city lights of Charlotte faded in the distance as the highway stretched ahead, wide and open. San Francisco waited with its hills, its fog, and its promise of something new. I didn't know exactly what I would find there, but I knew what I was bringing with me. Not the weight of old insults or the need to prove myself to anyone. Just the quiet certainty that I already had. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or public. Sometimes it's living a life that leaves the people who doubted you irrelevant. Rebecca could keep her opinions. I had my work, my freedom, and a future that was entirely my own. If you have ever been in a moment where someone made you feel small, where they looked at you and decided you were worth less than you knew you were, I want to hear your story. Tell me how you proved them wrong or how you're planning to. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is turn their doubt into the foundation of your own legacy.